News. New York City.
FAQ.
It started with a crack. It's never coming back. Burnt down to the ground, the town of Jamaica.
Welcome to FAQ NYC. This is Alex Brook Lynn, and this episode is part of our special series for October, Eulogy for New York. We had a bunch of wonderful New Yorkers write eulogies, whatever that meant to them, for New York. And today we're going to talk to Issa Ibrahim, artist living in Queens, who already had a eulogy of sorts written for Jamaica, Queens, and it's a song. So Issa, hello.
Hello, Alex. Hi.
Hi. So how are you doing today on this fine Sunday?
It is a fine Sunday, isn't it? It's a beautiful Sunday, a beautiful fall Sunday. Yeah, I live for days like today. To get up early, thank you very much. And just kind of enjoy it. Have my coffee and look out the window. Yeah, the windows and walls. I'm in Jackson Heights, and you have to look up to get some sunshine. But I tend up to looking at other people's apartments. Not in a peeping Tom kind of, not in a creepy way, but just just to look at the other people enjoying their day as they look at me enjoying my day.
Do you have the windows that look out onto like a almost not siloed because it's square, but the other apartments that are right across?
Right across the street. It's nothing but apartment buildings here in Jackson Heights. And everywhere I look, there's somebody else's window. They're the cats, the morning cats who sit in the window. We have cats that sit in our window, so everybody has a cat.
Morning apartment cats that you see
Apartment
across
cats.
The way.
Yeah. So I kind of enjoy that. Yeah.
I have apartments even closer than across the street.
Wow.
And we're really, in the same building. I think there was a law that was created that you had to have some kind of air shaft, right? And the building I'm in is built 1900. So it has the center completely out. And we have a garbage area that I call the courtyard, but really it's garbage area. It's the garbage area. Also, it has like fans from the pizza restaurant that send hot air up in the summertime. And in the wintertime, you can hear rats fighting for food. And yet, I'll tell you, these apartments are going for quite a sum. Right? Yeah.
I know.
Very. But so these neighbors I have are really, really close across the way. They've seen me walk the baby around. They've seen me pregnant. I've seen them having arguments.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very close building.
Yeah. Wow.
When we all come out into the landing, we don't acknowledge that we clearly see each other off.
There's that dance too, that New York dance of I know what you do. But when you go out and when you're by the elevator or something like that, or getting the mail, you just totally ignore each other.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about you, and tell me. Well, I know about you because I've hung out with you for many years. But tell my listeners a little bit about you.
All right. I'm a visual artist, a musician, an author. Thank goodness I got a chance to write my memoirs, which sounds very highfalutin. My memoirs, but a filmmaker. And general, just an artist, who grew up in Jamaica, Queens, and found myself caught up in the madness that enveloped all of the city in the late 80s, early 90s, with drugs. And my drug of choice was marijuana, which may make a lot of people go, oh, what? That's not a drug of choice, that's a recreation. But for me, it was a very serious addiction. As a result of my addiction and constant use, it created dissonance and a problem to the point where I developed schizophrenia behind the marijuana smoke and committed a very horrible act, which landed me in Creedmoor Psychiatric Center, which is in Queens Village, in the woods of Queens. I was there for almost 20 years. While there, it was kind of like a mixed blessing in that I was committed to a place that I may never get out of. I mean, ostensibly, I would spend the rest of my life there. I had to kind of fight my way out. But the beautiful thing was that it had an art program that was unlike anything in America, or maybe even the world. Maybe for Guggen, that place in Austria where they have the mentally ill people painting all day. And that was kind of like the inspiration by these two European artists and psychologists who started the program.
And just curious, what were the names, if you remember?
Yes, Bolek Gorzynski, he's a Polish artist and filmmaker and provocateur who passed away due to AIDS complications in the 90s at 44. I knew him very briefly, but he's a beautiful guy, very real character. And Dr. Janos Martin, who is a psychologist and also a filmmaker, and they met in Columbia Film School and formed a partnership, formed an alliance. And in the early 80s, Janos was working in Creedmoor as a psychologist, and he was walking the grounds and saw all these abandoned buildings and said, man, that'd be great to start an art project there. And they dreamt it, and it just happened by kismet to be at a time when the administration was saying, you want the building? Take it. We're not doing anything with it. And they got the building and transformed it after 30, 40 years into a huge, wondrous two-tiered art space. And so I would go there every day and paint. And I was a failed art student. I dropped out of art school, but that was my education, going to the Living Museum every day and painting every day and getting up my craft and soaking in a lot of art from these two Europeans who, had a great understanding and knowledge of art and outside art, which I later began to truck in. And after a long fought court battle, I did win my freedom in 2009 after 19 years. And then I just embarked on an art career with the help of exposure and an HBO documentary. And things came to me. It's almost like my mom, who I lost as a result of my mental illness and a horrible, tragic accident. But she blessed me, or it's like she was up there with the angels. She said, okay, this is a bad thing that happened to my baby, but I forgive him, and let's kind of like give him things. Let's give him things. So I was very blessed every step of the way.
A lot of people don't know about the Living Museum, and that actually they can visit it.
Yes.
If they make an appointment. I visited your studio, I think 2016.
Yes.
And you no longer have a studio there, right?
I do. I do. I have a workspace. I don't work there too much anymore because I've been fortunate enough to get my own apartment with my partner, Susan, who I've known for 25 years, who I met at the Living Museum. And we do all the artwork here in the apartment. But I do have a space where I keep a lot of the bigger work that I can't transport to here. So for people who were to go there and see, they'd see some of my work. Yeah.
And some of your bigger work is are these like amazing depictions of superheroes, DC, Marvel, depicted in different ways. Sometimes as African-American civil rights heroes, sometimes as sexual orgies. My favorite painting might be Hulk on the toilet, reading a paper.
Right. Yeah, that's become one of my iconic pieces, believe it or not. And people from 3 to 93 will walk by if I have that displayed. Oh, look, Hulk on the toilet, Hulk on the toilet.
And your partner, Susan, has also been involved in a lot of your artwork. She makes artwork of her own, but she's been involved. You've done films together. You've done paintings together, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. Yeah. She's a muse. Not only have we done paintings together, but she's like been a muse for 20 years. Yeah.
And you guys met at Creedmoor.
In Creedmoor. She was going through a very terrible time. Kind of like teenage angst that went on a little too long, and she found herself depressed and in a lot of pain, and wound up through a lot of mismanagement in a state psychiatric center, and that's where we met. And she got out like maybe 3 months after she got admitted, thank goodness. But I was there for 15 years after we met, and she just kept coming back. She just kept coming back to visit. And we developed a friendship and a love. And then I got out and we stuck together. And now we live together. So it's kind of like a beautiful story.
So tell me a little bit about some of the music that you make. And then I really want to hear about, more experiences about what led you to write this song, this eulogy for Jamaica Queens.
Well, my dad was a jazz musician back in the 50s and in the 60s, and then when jazz went fusion, and wasn't trad jazz like Miles Davis and the cool stuff anymore, and when it changed like all musics do, he wasn't into it. because a lot of it required taking LSD and the harder drugs. And he was like, nah, it's okay. I'm happy with my pot, you know. So he ended up becoming working at a New Jersey bandstand, doing like weekend gigs, doing weddings and bar mitzvahs, you know, bad stuff, doing top 40. I remember when he came home one day and said, "Yes, they want me to do Whip It Is." And I said, "That's a good song. It's a horrible song." "No, it's a good song." Yeah. But anyways, having that education, having a father as a jazz musician, my mother as an avid record collector, I soaked in a lot of music. But I never really had anything to sing about. I was like a middle-class Black kid, which maybe has some reference, but not much. So all my years when I was out and about in the 90s and 80s, I had nothing to sing about until I lost my mind, committed this horrible act, and wound up in a mental hospital. Then all of a sudden, I had something to sing about. That was like fodder for songs, you know? And so I also ended up inappropriate relationship with one of the staff there, and we got caught. But one of her lovely parting gifts, you could say, was she left me with a guitar. And I took what few chords I already knew and then put some effort into learning to play the damn thing because I had nothing but time. And songs started pouring out of me. So here I was locked up in a mental hospital with really, truly no release date and a guitar and a head full of songs. And so I just started writing songs. And after a while, I had hundreds of them. And after a while, I saved up some money from art sales in the hospital, which seems unlikely, but it's true. I had a nest egg. So I bought a recording setup, a little portable recorder and some mic. And so after a while, I started making records, CDs, and mailing them out to all the connections I'd made at the Living Museum over the years, because a lot of European tourists come to Living Museum because they'd heard of it through the European contacts of the people who ran the program. So I was making like these little homemade CDs and snail mailing it to various places all over the world. And I just kept doing that, just kept recording. And as you do anything, you get better at it, you know. And so the first couple of records I made were they had a naive charm to them, but pretty rudimentary. But after a while, I was really getting good at it. And I ended up with like 15 albums that no one's buying, but they stand as a testament to an experience. And they're also themed with mental health and themed with loss and isolation and which now everyone's doing, you know, or maybe in the 90s that became like a common theme. So yeah, I just became a pop singer for a minute there. But then my guitar ran out of songs, as someone once said, you know, and I just stopped writing and stopped recording. And I realized after like 15 albums, I kind of shot my wad, excuse the language. You know, I haven't done anything in about 4 or 5 years now.
Some of your songs talks very specifically about your condition when you had acute symptoms of schizophrenia. One of the songs, Paranoid.
Yes, Paranoid. Yeah, definitely.
And I thought that song was incredibly informative because it's a great song, but it's also about the ways in which you felt that everyone was, when speaking to you, was kind of speaking the double speak, as you call it.
Yes. And I tried to capture that, you know, and I don't know if it was successful. I tried other passes at it, but that one's probably the most successful of the bunch. But yeah, that weird dissonance, that weird feeling, and looking in the mirror and being in your own head and examining yourself through your eyes and through other people's eyes, you know. And a lot of that, I think mental illness is just insecurity and what other people think about you, what you fear other people will think about you. And so you're looking at yourself through the eyes of society and judging yourself as you feel you're being judged, and just like layers of insecurity, really. And trying to capture that in a song, in a 2-minute pop song.
You talk a lot about the death of Jamaica Queens, and
Yes.
in your work, not only are there themes expressing your feelings and experience with mental illness, but also race growing up in the 80s. So can you talk a little bit more specifically about your song?
Yeah. Like I mentioned, my dad was a jazz musician, and my parents were like bohemians, not hippies, but beatniks, like a generation before the hippies. You know, they were like, so, and they had a little bit of money, and they invested in a home in Jamaica, Queens. And back in the 50s and 60s, when the Black were maybe allowed to have take part in the American dream and become a part of the middle class, which doesn't really exist anymore. They were a part of the Black middle class, you know, the bourgeoisie, Negro bourgeoisie, which I talk about in the song. And all our friends in that neighborhood were all strivers, what they used to call, you know, Black people who got up and who worked hard and got up enough money to buy a home for the children, to invest, you know, in a home. And for a brief moment, I was cognizant of how special and beautiful that was in the 70s. And throughout the 80s, I saw that tarnish, you know, and saw crack move in and just obliterate that whole dream. And it even infected our home in that I became a marijuana addict. You know, my parents smoked a lot of marijuana, and all their friends were jazz musicians who'd come over and smoke marijuana. And it affected me in a negative way, but that affects a lot of people differently, so I can't really talk about that. But crack also invaded the home in that my two older brothers became crackheads. And watching it that close up, and see how other people in the neighborhood were. One guy, our next door neighbor, had a beautiful home and sold it for $50,000 and disappeared for 3 months, but then you saw him wandering the neighborhood looking for crack, you know. And that was like a horrible experience. You know, he fell through the cracks. Now, I don't know what happened to him. I don't know what happened to anybody from that old neighborhood anymore. And I haven't been back, except to do some shooting for a video I did. But even then, I was kind of looking over my shoulder and hoping nobody recognized me. Not that I'm famous or anything, but just recognize me from what happened in my life. That was such a terrible disturbance that might give somebody a negative feeling to then stop me in the street and give me a hard time. But yeah, it was just to watch a beautiful neighborhood like that tarnish, and know that was happening all over New York, all over the country. It was just heartbreaking.
Do you have any thoughts about parallels about what's happening now, especially with not just mental illness, but also the opioid crisis? Now, the opioid crisis kind of has affected middle class of all types. Everyone talks about now that it affects the white middle class, laws around making, you know, softer, easier ways for people to do something other than jail time, rehab, et cetera, diversion courts, that's happening because it has a lot of white victims. But the current state of New York City and the opioid crisis and the mental health crisis, do you think about that as you see that unfold?
When I got out in 2009, it was interesting because I noticed everyone from my generation, kids born in the 60s and early 70s and maybe a little bit later into the 70s, they were all homeless. They were all homeless, drug addicted, mentally ill people. And it's not as if they were emptying out the asylums, because they actually cracked down in the 90s and started locking people up, if you remember, not only in jails, but in asylums. But anyone who ever got out had no follow through, had no kind of follow up care. And now I see my generation, I see my contemporaries, and I feel so blessed that I'm not in that situation. But I see people of my age, my contemporaries, all homeless and mentally ill and desperate. And it's sad. It's really sad. And a lot can be said about how they let the Black people fall through the cracks, but the minute it happened to the white kids, they're quick with, you know, follow-up care, and they're quick with, you know, ways to make sure it doesn't happen to their kids, you know. It's just a sad state of affairs. I don't know really what Eric Adams or Joe Biden or anybody is going to do to redress this terrible blight that's happened to the Black community. And you've got to be stronger than most to survive it nowadays. And people are surviving by, it's become cool, or not cool, but almost a requirement to skirt the law to survive.
Some might say they don't leave a lot of people much of a choice,
Right.
especially when it gets down to the bureaucratic paperwork that you have to fill out. If you fill
Right.
out one thing, you might not get housing. But if you
Right.
say another thing that might not necessarily be true, then you'll be fast tracked for housing. So if somebody had their wits about them, so they say,
Right.
and they're living on the street and they check one box and that'll get them housing, like who among us would not check the box, even if it
Right.
was. So I think in those ways, in those like bureaucratic red tape long line ways, they do force people to choose.
I'll tell you, when you're checking that box, it's always been in the Black community. Don't go to a mental hospital. Which is why my book, How the Hospital Always Wins, became the first chronicle by an African American from behind the walls of a mental hospital. Because Black people, to be a first, after it's kind of interesting, but it's not surprising because they always tell you, don't go to a mental hospital, don't talk to a psychiatrist, you're not crazy. And for me to admit, yes, I'm crazy, and write a book about it, almost outs me as somebody who's not really a part of the community. But there is a disturbance within the Black community, but it's not craziness because they've been gaslighting us for centuries. So it's like, yeah, there's a disturbance, but we're not crazy in that we're just trying to survive in a system that's trying to kill us. And how do you do that? But just try to survive the best way you can, and don't call me crazy. But when it gets so bad where you're out on the street or you have to commit crimes to survive, then you get caught up in the system, and the system's not designed for you to survive in it. So it's a devilish catch-22.
A lot of people say that right now is an important time as we come into our November elections with especially Alvin Bragg. We've had him on the show, Manhattan DA, Democratic Manhattan DA candidate, talking about how he's going to spend some discretionary funds to help out the mentally ill diversion court, which would in turn have fuel more of a need for the city to kind of get their act together when it comes to resources for aftercare, after the hospital, after prison, for the mentally ill, really specifically. And I think that right now there's not a huge understanding of why there's so many mentally ill people on the street. And it's hard to explain because it's a long sordid tale, 20 years in the making.
Sure. Maybe longer. I mean, it's a broken system that you've got to overhaul it completely to get it even up to speed working. And even then, it would take years for it to start kind of righting itself. But you got to overhaul it completely. And they always do piecemeal quick fixes and band-aids, and so I mean, but it's a totally broken system, and a lot of it is governmental. A lot of it is in the whole critical race theory in terms of citywide politics. It's thank goodness that we're talking about it now.
Yeah, I mean, critical race theory can more specifically be taught on a city history level, which would be very, very interesting for someone to kind of dig into. So you've just given me an idea to find an expert guest for the future on city history. So a few things. Give me the name of your book.
The Hospital Always Wins is published by Chicago Review Press. It came out in 2016. It is, according to them, I didn't even know, but according to my editor and the publisher, the very first memoir writings from an African American from behind the walls of a mental hospital.
And where can our listeners find your work, your artwork, your music, more about you?
Okay, IssaIbrahim.com, IssaIbrahim.com. There's links to my Instagram feed. I have a YouTube channel with everything. You can just kind of bask in it and just drown in it, really. All the music, all the wacky videos, all the films I've done. Everything's linkable.
And this upcoming weekend, the weekend of Halloween, you will be at the Queen's Night Market.
Let's hope.
Let's hope.
Because I'm checking the forecast every day, and it looks like it may be rain. And the night market does go on, even though it's rainy, but that would be a bit of a drag when
it's hard to pull out your artwork. So
it's hard.
You and Susan sell prints from your artwork at the Queen's Night Market.
Yes.
And which this weekend will be the last weekend, correct?
The last weekend for the season, yes. And Sue sells originals too, and it's very affordable, but very nice. And we were there last night because we're taping this Sunday morning, like you mentioned, and we did very well. So yeah, check us out. Hopefully we'll be there this coming Halloween, and wear a costume because it's going to be a Halloween extravaganza. And hopefully we'll be there. Unless it's really raining, then we may beg off. But don't tell the guys who rented that, although I just did. So.
Well, maybe they won't listen.
Let's hope they do, though.
Let's hope they also do. So everybody, we heard a snippet from the song at the beginning, and we will play the rest of the song after this interview. Thank you, Issa, for coming on. Thank you so much for contributing this song. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. God bless. Merrick Road and Linden Boulevard, modest homes on tree-lined streets, once a haven for the blacks who made it a Negro bourgeoisie. Times have changed as things so often do, if only the young ones knew. Most remember burning embers, remnants of a wondrous place. It started with a crack, it's never coming back. Burnt down to the ground, the town of Jamaica. Though it breaks my heart to see it change, only in my dreams will it stay the same. Merrick Road and Linden Boulevard, far away from what I knew. Every face has been replaced. All the blacks have now gone blue. Paranoia and depression, all good lessons are hard to learn. I recall the final days that lay to waste this wondrous place. It started with a crack, it's never coming back. Torn down to the ground, the town of Jamaica. The town of Jamaica. The town of Jamaica. Only in my dreams. The town of Jamaica. My hometown of Queens. The town of Jamaica. Only in my dreams. The town of Jamaica. My hometown of Queens. The town of Jamaica. Only in my dreams. The
out of Jamaica.